the president gets to direct his resources as he deems fit. And it just seems a little counterintuitive to me that the city of Portland can come in and say, no, you need to do it differently.
A lot of people are rejoicing over a federal judge's order in Illinois that temporarily blocked the National Guard from engaging in activities in Chicago. But in that case, and a similar case in Oregon, I think a lot of folks are missing an important thing that happened when Justice Department attorneys arguing on behalf of the Trump administration made their case for deployment of the National Guard into Portland and Chicago. Essentially, what those lawyers said is that you can't even question the president's judgment when it comes to deploying the military into U.S. cities, and that his decisions on matters like that are, quote, unreviewable, as a Justice Department attorney said today in Illinois. Now, the judge there effectively rebuked that claim and said there's no evidence of an ongoing rebellion or any of the other things that the Justice Department, on behalf of the Trump administration, claimed in court. So the National Guard is temporarily blocked from doing anything in Chicago. The reason that I bring this up is that I think it's instructive in understanding how Justice Department lawyers and a lot of other people, Republicans in Congress, many of our fellow Americans, view limits on presidential power, which is essentially that there are none. And of course, I'm not talking about presidential power in general because, for instance, when Barack Obama was president, Republicans were very fired up and very upset about the number of executive orders that he issued during his time as president. Now, obviously, in Trump's second term, he has far exceeded that. So we're talking about Trump's executive power, which Republicans apparently believe has no limitations on it. Remember what the Justice Department lawyer said today in Illinois. Trump's decisions related to deployment of the National Guard there are unreviewable. That means unreviewable by the city of Chicago, the state of Illinois, and its governor, who is supposed to have control over the National Guard until Trump tries to federalize it. They're unreviewable, the Justice Department lawyer argues, even for the federal courts. Combine this with what Stephen Miller said this week
with respect to the federalizing of the California National Guard. Under Title 10 of the U.S. Code, the president has plenary authority.
And I think it's fair to say that what the entirety of the federal government and congressional Republicans are working towards is limitless authority for Trump to do whatever he wants. The fact that Stephen Miller used the word plenary, which I had to look up to see what it means, the fact that they had to find another word to describe the broad and sweeping and apparently limitless powers that Trump is claiming that he has, and that in one instance the Supreme Court backed up, really says something. They're running out of words to say he has more power. It's not just that people like Miller and congressional Republicans are arguing that there's really no limits on Trump's power. In Oregon today, a federal judge who was appointed by Trump also argued that nobody can even really question his action. In that case, as well as the case in Illinois, as well as the deployment of troops to Los Angeles in June, the Trump administration argued for the federalization of National Guard members from various states under Section 12406 of U.S. Code. That section of U.S. law allows for the president to federalize National Guard troops for three reasons. Number one, if there's a foreign invasion happening. Obviously not happening. Forget what Stephen Miller says about undocumented immigrants. That's not what they're talking about when they say a foreign invasion. They mean actual troops from another country on U.S. soil. So that one's out. Number two is an ongoing rebellion. Now, lawyers for the Justice Department argued earlier this week in the Oregon case that there is actually a rebellion going on. Seems like a stretch. So today, when a three-judge panel in the Ninth Circuit heard arguments about stopping the National Guard from being deployed to Portland, the government relied on the third prong of Section 12406, which says that the president can federalize National Guard troops in the event that he's unable to enforce law with the regular forces. And what that means is, can local or state authorities like the Portland Police or the Chicago Police Department enforce laws? Can Trump's immigration agents enforce laws without the aid of National Guard troops? The Justice Department lawyer today argued that he can't. That the situation in Portland is so out of control that they've had to reassign Federal Protective Service officers to the ICE facility there to protect it. And therefore, that affects those officers' ability to enforce federal law. Therefore, Trump isn't able to do it. Therefore, you got to send in the National Guard so that they can get back to the work of enforcing federal laws. Now, the Oregon Attorney General's office said this doesn't really add up because there's nothing really happening at the ICE facility in Portland. In fact, there's so much nothing happening that when Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem visited there this week, she stood on the roof of the facility and had a bizarre filmed stare down contest with people on the street, which were apparently mostly journalists and a guy in a chicken suit. Anyway, as a lawyer with the Oregon Attorney General's office went through day by day in the month of September all of this nothing that is happening outside the ICE facility there, Judge Ryan Nelson, who's a Trump appointee, said, well, maybe there's some stuff that's going on behind the scenes that we don't know about that could be affecting their ability to enforce federal law. And therefore, we shouldn't really be questioning the president on whether or not this prong of Section 12406 applies in this instance.
The problem that I have with this argument that I'm just trying to struggle with is, the president gets to direct his resources as he deems fit. And it just seems a little counterintuitive to me that the city of Portland can come in and say, no, you need to do it differently. Now, I understand there's a statute here and we're going to have to review that. But this goes to the level of deference that I think the president is entitled to in these circumstances. And it's not all driven. Would you agree? It's not all driven by what we see on the streets. It's also driven to some degree by what's going on behind the scenes. And you don't have a full view into that.
Based on that and some other things that happened today, I think it's likely that maybe even by the time you're watching this, we'll have a 2-1 decision in the Ninth Circuit in favor of Trump deploying the National Guard to Portland. And then probably what's going to happen is what the judge in Illinois warned would happen if the National Guard took to the streets of Chicago, which is that they would cause civil unrest because people in Chicago would be so pissed off that the Guard was on their streets at Trump's behest for no real reason at all, that they would go out in mass numbers and have protests and maybe even clash with authorities. The judge said you could essentially expect that in Chicago. I think you can probably expect that in Portland too.